Dear members and guests, welcome to our webinar with Abu Dhabi Art. For those who don't know me, I am Barbara Faranik-Matonet, founder and president of the Art Circle. This year is the 12th edition of Abu Dhabi Art. It started the 19th of November and will continue till the 26th. Because of COVID, it's an interactive digital edition that brings together galleries and artists from across the world in a number of curated gallery exhibitions and sectors. The amazing team of Abu Dhabi Art is very close to my heart. As some of you may know, they supported the Art Circle from the very beginning, and we want to greatly thank again all the Abu Dhabi Art team for that. Today, we have the privilege to have with us Nada Raza, who is curator for the second year of the gallery sector, A Picture Holds Us Captive. Nada Raza is curatorial advisor for Al Circle Art Foundation. Prior to this, she was the founding artistic director of the Ishara Art Foundation in Dubai, research curator at Tate Research Center Asia. She also worked on international art at the Institute of International Visual Art and at Green Cardamom in London. Nada curated many major exhibitions around the world. She holds an MA from the Chelsea College of Art and Design and is a doctoral candidate to the Cultural Institute of Art. Today, Nada have brought to us amazing artists, Augustine Perez, Sarah Naim, Michael John Whelan, and Sarah Al-Maheri. But I will leave to Nada the privilege to introduce them to you in details. Before starting, I would like to ask you to address your question by writing them in the chat function that you can find on your screen. At the end of the presentation, Nada will ask them for you. Nada, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And it is indeed a great privilege. And for that, I would like to thank the Art Abu Dhabi team and also thank you and all of the people from the Art Circle who are listening to us this morning. Today is really about the artists. I'm really pleased that 4 out of the 8 artists in the exhibition will be talking to you about their work today. But before I introduce them, just a few words about the exhibition, which I hope you will see on the online edition of Art Abu Dhabi. The presentation is called A Picture Held Us Captive. And we have one artist or practice that is featured for every day of the online fair. Can everybody hear me? Okay. And the premise is really thinking critically about the idea of the online presentation of art in itself. You know, over this past year, the art world has very quickly pivoted to remaining connected to its audiences as much as possible in the circumstances, and we have been working very hard to bring exhibitions online. And I thought this was an opportunity to take a step back and really think about what that means. The invitation from Abu Dhabi Art was to do an exhibition that featured work by artists that are represented by galleries based in the UAE. So the 8 artists that I selected are represented by galleries mostly at Al Circle Avenue, which is a sort of destination for contemporary art in the city and in the region. And this was an opportunity for me to look back at the last, let's say, 2 decades of practice, but artists either have strong relationships with or artists whose practice I admire. And A Picture Held Us Captive is a selection of work that in some ways challenges what I feel is happening at the moment, where we're taking kind of 2-dimensional works and creating virtual environments and trying to sort of recreate reality. And I wanted to puncture that a little bit and think about what it means instead to create this world where we're very dependent on visual language, where we're very dependent on the image. And to think more about a slightly more nuanced conversation. Because really a lot of work that has happened, especially with sound and with video art in the last 20 years is, you know, these are media that do translate well digitally, photography, for instance. And so often the art world is focused on sort of the preciousness of the object. And I wanted to go back and really think about form and content again. So I hope that you will take a look at the show online. And the artist actually featured today, Michael John Wellen, is with us, and we'll talk about his work. Just to introduce the four artists that you'll be hearing from today, we have Augustine Paredes. Augustine is a photographer. He's originally from the Philippines, but lives and works in Dubai. And he'll be talking about his work, but also the project that he did with Al Circal Online that we have featured a glimpse of for Art Abu Dhabi. And the next artist you'll hear from is Sarah Naeem. Sarah is also based between Dubai and grew up partly in London. She's based here at the moment. Her work is looking again digitally, you know, and she looks at both the micro and the macro sort of level of kind of, you know, the universe, really zooming into the microscopic. And the work featured in the show is a video that she'll tell you a bit more about, but also talk about her sculptural practice. And then we will hear from Michael John Wellen, who joins us from Berlin, originally from Ireland. MJ, as we call him, is somebody who has spent a lot of time in the UAE. He's done a residency here with Al Circal, and he will be talking about a work from 2007 that's in the show, The Collector of Skies, but also talking about his photographic practice. And MJ is someone who thinks about both time and exploration in really beautiful ways. And the final artist we'll hear from today is Sarah Al-Maheri. Sarah is based in Abu Dhabi, recently graduated from NYU. Her work is extremely sophisticated and deals with text and with texture. And the work that we have featured for the presentation for the fair is In Conversation, which is a piece which is a letter to an artist that she admires, and then also an artist talk series, which is a series of talks that she and her peers developed over the period of lockdown. So over to Augustine, who will be presenting first today.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Augustine Paredes. I'm a Filipino photographer living and working here in the UAE. Today I'll show you an amalgamation of the works that I've been doing over the course of 4 years that I've been living here in Dubai. My work usually navigates stories that tell the stories of narratives of love, loss, and longing. And this type of images, I try to incorporate poetry and my love for words, inspired by my experiences as a migrant worker here in the UAE, and also my Southeast Asian consciousness and my curious gaze. On my next slide, I will show you photographs that I've collected during my travels and also my life here in the country. So this first image is titled Boy Sleeping in Hostel Beirut. This has been exhibited in Latvia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and recently have been sold in order for us to help the victims of the explosion in Beirut. This is an image that was taken in Beirut in 2017 on the way back home from staying in Beirut for over a week and experiencing the city and somehow meeting strangers and encountering stories of Lebanese people in the city of Beirut. And on the next slide is a self-portrait, sort of reinterpreting my first experience here in Dubai as coming from the Philippines, and being greeted by a very small space, and making it and forcing myself to call it home in the comforts of one bed alongside with all of my possessions. And this is one way of me trying to incorporate as well the saying, kung maikli ang kumot, matutong bumaluktot, which means if the means are short, learn how to slouch when sleeping. And that is the title of the work. And this work has also been exhibited in various exhibitions in and outside Dubai. And the next slide is one of my photographs from my exhibition at Art Dubai last year. This is part of a series called Cooking Adobo in the Heart of Dubai. This is me questioning the violence of the question, where are you from? And also trying to interpret the question, where are you from? And also how to survive for one and cook for one, and how to preserve the sense of home when you're a migrant worker living and working outside your home country. And the next slide will also present the poetry that I have included in a photograph. It's called The Recipe, and it's about the recipe for staying longer in Dubai. And this talks about the certain elements and certain practices that one could experience in order for him or her or them to stay longer in a place where they're not from. And the next slide is my recent publication. It's sponsored by, no, not sponsored by, it has been, the excerpt has been published in Al Circle Online. And it's a self-published book with 100 editions and 50 pages. Inside it are 12 poems and 19 images. And the images and the poetry has been collected over a year after trying to understand what it feels like to turn 25, and also try to investigate the ephemerality of human existence. And the next slide is titled The Peachness of Peaches. This is also part of Conversations at the End of the Universe. This is inspired by the Arabic proverb, tomorrow there will be apricots, and which means in your dreams, or it will never happen. And this is my way of interpreting how when peaches are not available, we can always settle for apricots and appreciate the apricots that have always been there, because peaches will take time. And the next one is, this has been part of my exhibition virtually in Abu Dhabi Art. This is one of the experiments I have dealt with throughout developing Conversations at the End of the Universe, wherein I took photographs using film and analog and tried to develop it myself, and kind of embracing the mistakes that happened while developing the project, and also while developing the images. On the next slide is entitled For Edward. This has been one of the anchors of this project, because it has been, I wrote this for my friend who suddenly passed away in 2019 without any reason. That all of a sudden he just laid on the floor and was sent to the hospital and then passed away after. So the poem, you can hear and read the poem and the photographs that are there, also part of Conversations at the End of the Universe. And on the next slide is sort of one of the last images that I have taken for this project, wherein also it's part of the series of photographs that I have taken on film and developed myself. And somehow the black circles have appeared, and this is my way of embracing the abyss that we talk to when we pray, or we talk to when we wonder what's happening with ourselves. And somehow the abyss is also a symbolism and a metaphor for the nothingness that might happen, or that might appear once all of this is over. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, pop it on the Q&A box.
Before you go, Augustine, I just wanted to ask you one question, which is, this form of working with both image and text is something that has sort of happened organically for you, where you have produced poetry that sort of, in a way, works contrapuntally to the image. Could you say a little bit about that process and whether you think that that is something that you that kind of has come to define the way in which you work, or whether it's related to this?
For me, I've always worked with text, whether or not it's personal or for research. It's only very recently that I have actually embraced the poetry side of my work and somehow tell the poetry also through the photos. And to me, what is special about combining words and images is that photographs can only say so much, and also words can only say so much. And what would happen if both of them are combined? Would it be able to tell the things that I want to say? Would it tell a better narrative? And I think that's one way of me trying to put out a deeper meaning to the conversation and to the dialogue that I'm trying to put out, and anchoring it with so much words and so much images. And yeah, I think it's both a challenge to do poetry, or to capture poetry in terms of creating a photograph, and also it's a challenge to put images in poetry. So it's kind of this like cross pollination of that.
We have a question asking where people can find your book. Is it through your website?
So the book has been sold out after 2 months of publishing it, and I'm very proud of that. Thank you so much to Gulf Photo Plus, who's been home to all of my works. But you can view the excerpt online at elsercall.online, and there are voice recordings in there wherein I read to you the poems that I've written. So for that,
we can share the link with Barbara to distribute to our audience today. Thank you so much, Augustine.
Thank you so much.
And I would like to introduce Sarah once again. Over to you, Sarah. You're still on mute. There we go. Okay, gotcha. I can hear you now.
Hey, I'm Sarah Naeem, and I'm a Syrian visual artist currently based between Dubai and London. And the work that's currently shown at ADA is a video work that I actually made while I was doing my MFA at Slade. And it's never been shown, so it's really exciting to show it. I'm basically gesturing semantic primes, and semantic primes are words that can't be defined or made into a definition without using its own word in the definition. So here I've gestured each word of the 68 semantic primes using one gesture per word. And I'm fascinated with gesture because actually only 7% of human communication is based on words, and the rest is based on actually gesture. So it's not just used as a way to reinforce what it is that one is saying, it's actually a language in and of itself. And I'm always kind of constantly looking at the way that people shape words with their hands, and they can kind of make these more visceral, ephemeral things into a three-dimensional shape, which is what a lot of my practice is actually about. We can see in the next work. So the crux of my practice is based on the fact that visible light occupies 1/1000th of 1% within the whole electromagnetic spectrum. So we really don't see much. And I'm very fascinated in sight as a way to describe perception and the way that microformations can shape the way that we actually perceive basically the things around us. For example, in this show, when heartstrings collapse at third line, I had these high voltage power cables throughout the space, which was once used to transfer energy and information across Dubai, but then they're broken and corrupt. So they kind of behave as these faulty communications, or communication that was kind of delivered but not. So something broken between received information and kind of a glitch. And a lot of my work actually works with a glitch. In the background, you can see images of my dead skin cells under the scanning electron microscope, but then they're glitched. So it's kind of saying something but nothing, similar to the gesture work that's shown at ADA. And this is from my reaction series. I photographed using expired Polaroid film light, and there is a kind of chemical reaction between the chemistry of the film and light. And I've made these shapes based on the content within the image, and the rim, to try and kind of break the boundary between the content of the image and the rim of the artwork, in a way to kind of free itself of its shape, although it's very shaped. But yeah, a lot of my practice is very much based on boundary and the notion of boundary, actually, because on a micro level, boundary doesn't really exist. And I think that's a very fundamental truth which shapes the way we think and feel separate from one another. But in fact, on a cellular scale, it's just different densities of matter, and we're completely merged and shared. And the next work, I think, is from a recent series called Building Blocks, where I photographed under the scanning electron microscope also my dead skin cells, along with Aleppo soap and yasmin and soil from my grandmother's garden in Damascus. And at 50,000 times magnified, you're actually more distant from this place that was very nostalgic to me. So it looks at memory and the way it's shaped between distance and examination, and that kind of push and pull that exists between the way we remember things and the truth of it. That's my practice in a crux. Welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and for sort of putting it in a nutshell for us. But I would love to hear a little bit more about your process, how you translate these sort of very, the minutiae of our lives into these larger scale objects, and what that shift in scale, like, from what I know of your work, there's a very detailed process involved in how you decide each of these images is going to actually turn into a kind of more apprehendable object. So could you talk a little bit about that process of transformation?
Sure, yeah. So I guess around 11 years ago now, I started using the scanning electron microscope. I'm really interested in science, although it's not something that was my strong suit at all in school. But I kind of realized that in order to describe that space I mentioned about non-boundary, I was always looking at my skin as being a kind of illusion of the division between internal and external, and that is kind of just a field of two energy forces. And how do you kind of really describe that space, not conceptually, but visually? And I felt that by going down to that cellular scale, using scientific apparatus, you're able to actually describe space where micro resembles the macro. You kind of enter these, I don't have an image of it here, but these kind of terrestrial looking landscapes. But in fact, it's of our skin. It's something that we embody and possess all day, every day. And so the process is, yeah, very examination orientated. I think that I have a lot of pleasure in the process of going really micro, because it shapes the way you see macro, kind of, we've evolved to understand notions such as division and boundary in this scale, but when you go down to that scale, you're able to kind of explore a very different terrain. So that's kind of some of my process. But yeah, so these kind of more sculptural ways of working was because I felt very limited in photography. working really two-dimensional and working only kind of, or printing and materialize things when I had a show. And I wanted a daily studio practice where the concepts about form and shape I could actually explore with form and shape. So I started to build these sculptures, I would say, I guess, two-dimensional sculptures using plexi and wood and print. So it's still very photographic at its core, but shifting scales from 2D to 3D.
Thank you. And Sarah's work, I, You, Someone, Person, is going to be on Al Circal Online tomorrow. So please look out for that. And it's a work that looks at how we are bounded by language. Thank you so much, Sarah. We have a question, which I think we have time for, from Hannah Kutsi, which is, the question is, how subjective is your work?
How subjective?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, I mean, I think all work is subjective, but I also think that some of what I'm trying to explore is objective truths. I think boundary is an objective truth. I think notions of lack of boundary are, I'm really passionate about trying to illustrate the lack of boundary between things, because I really think that in a shared space, we're able to come together much more. And I do think that that is an objective reality, actually. You can explore that on a quantum scale. You can explore that with particles and waves, and you can explore that on, you know, on an emotional level. You can explore it on a conceptual level. So I would like to think that it's objective, but of course, the way that one looks at a work without the context or text to support it, you'll come with your own subjective realizations about the work.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And you guys can keep putting questions into the Q&A box. We'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. Hi, Michael. Over to
Hi,
you.
good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for inviting me this morning.
Thanks for joining us. I know it's very early for you.
It is very early. Yeah, I'm coming to you from Berlin, so it's quite early this morning. But it's lovely to join you. So my name is Michael John Whelan. I'm an Irish artist born in Dublin, and I studied in London, where I did my master's in Chelsea. And basically, as Nat has been saying, I've been working a lot in the UAE over the last year. So what I'm going to show you today is a little kind of a snapshot of my practice, beginning with my most recent exhibition, which I did in Grey Noise at Al Circal, and then moving kind of back in time to the work that we're showing at 88. This is the first project we showed. This is an install shot from Grey Noise, and it's a project called And They Did Live by Watchfires. So what I was doing is making these two sister projects, this one and the next slide you'll see in a second. They're looking at environmental effects and looking at how to sort of process those and how to document things abstractly, but looking at kind of different narratives that are involved in that. So the first project, And They Did Live by Watchfires, is looking at sky glow, which is an environmental phenomenon where lights from cities are refracted off environmental or meteorological effects. So, for example, cloud. In this case here, this is a shot from Berlin, taken from Teufelsberg, which is a mountain range just outside the city. And I'm looking back in at the environmental effects that are taking place, so light pollution, and looking at how that light pollution can be documented and seen as, I guess, as a narrative of abstraction that we can then use to sort of think about our world and think about the effects that are taking place in our world. And this is a theme that kind of pops up a lot in my work, as we'll see moving forward. This project here is called Darkness Had No Need. I started this in 2017, and it's an ongoing project, and it's looking at the darkest sites in the world. So these are basically locations that are certified for astronomy and for looking at the night sky. And I was interested in that certification and what it means when we have to certify a space when overpopulation and light pollution are affecting the environments in such a way that we have to start defining places that are not affected by mankind. So I went to these different sites and I photographed them, and I saw them as an environment themselves. So looking at the landscape and documenting that. So what I did was I went with a large format camera. I don't know if people know, it's a 5x4 camera. So really absorbing the most amount of information as possible onto the negative and doing very, very long exposures. So 1.5 hours up to 3-hour exposures, depending on each site. So in this shot that's presented today, you can see on the left side is Germany, a place called West Havelland. So it's a swamp area. And you'll see different traces. So you're looking at it as a tree, actually, that's recorded in silhouette. So when I'm there in that space, it's completely dark. So I see nothing. And only the technique, the chemistry, and the physics of the medium can actually record some traces of information. And yeah, and then this work here is called Nocturne. This is a kind of a, I worked a lot in photography. So I trained originally as a photographer. My first qualification was a diploma. Very, very analog. I learned all the basics of chemistry and all these different facets of that medium. And I kind of have been coming back to that a lot, looking at, you know, as sustainability and how you can kind of reflect that in the medium. So here, this is a Polaroids, but a 5x4 type of Polaroid, not the kind of traditional one that everybody knows with the sort of bar on the bottom. And I photographed a bat enclosure, like an artificial construction in Vienna in a zoo, where there basically people can walk through and experience being in the same space as bats. So I was looking at the different non-human organisms that are affected by us. In this case, you can see the shots on the bottom. There's just 3 samples here. They are traces of mankind are there. So there's like a CCTV camera in one of the shots. There's the gestures of a hand where someone has constructed a fake rock in the other of the shots. So this is a series of 7 of them that I presented also at Grey Noise. And this is a continuing one. So the next series then we'll look at another animal that's affected by our environmental effects. This is a series Aqualung. So this is kind of a very large project that is also inclusive of a new film, which I'm just wrapping up now. And then it's yeah, photography work as well. And this is the main sculpture work. So this was co-commissioned by Jameel Art Center. It was presented in 2018 in an exhibition called Crude, curated by Murtaza Vali. And this project was looking at a very specific sort of chapter in history where Jacques Cousteau was working in 1954 for co-commissioned by companies that would then go on to become British Petroleum and Total to do surveys in the Persian Gulf. So he went around and he did different site surveys and geological surveys into the seabed itself with his dive team. And using that information that was passed down and eventually became you know, a source of information for the oil drilling that took place off the coast of Abu Dhabi. So I went with a dive team. We were filming, we were photographing, and we were also non-invasively collecting sand samples from these sites. And then I went and I worked with a Murano trained glassmaker who's based in Denmark. And together we made, in a very traditional, basic way, batches of glass. So glass from scratch. And we blew it into used diving cylinders. So cylinders that have had their whole life used over time to sustain life underwater. So we cut the top off and we blew the glass into those cylinders. And you can see in this shot here, it takes the traces and the effects from inside the cylinders on the outside of the glass. And the glass itself has these different traces, these air bubbles, these particles, and these impurities actually that come from the sand. And yeah, so this is a series of 15 that was presented. The next project is inclusions. A lot of my works are quite ongoing to sort of give that spectrum over time. So you can see the different points over time in them. And this is a series that's also ongoing. And what I've done is, this is a particular one that's relevant to the UAE as well. So I basically collecting rubbish or trash that you see out in the sea. It's kind of a basic thing. I'm a diver, and when we're out anyway, it's a basic thing that you do when you're on a boat. You just see something plastic or whatever, and you're always collecting it. So I started to think of these moments and how we can kind of put that into a point of discussion or kind of a monument to ourselves. So this is an LED party balloon that you see quite often in Dubai with the kind of flashing lights that the kids have around walking around the streets. This is 120 kilometers out in the sea. We found this floating and corroding and potentially damaging fish life. This was the first in that series, and it's cast into a concrete cube, quite small, 15 by 15 by 15. And this just sits quietly in a space or in an exhibition as this, as I say, this is a Zoic monument to our effects. And this continued then with different, all over the world now. So I've been, and also different scales. The scale is dependent on the object itself that's taken from the sea. So in my next slide, this is also part of that larger body of work that I was mentioning initially to do with Jacques Cousteau. And at one of these sites, we collected water from that exact moment, and we photographed 2 shots. And this is the air bubbles coming from the diver's respirator. So this outflux of the sustainability of life underwater, this thing that keeps us alive underwater, but is also a wider discussion of what is needed in our planet, looking at coral and looking at nature, and coral particularly in the Gulf as being the lungs of the sea. And a photograph was taken of these two breaths of the diver coming out seconds apart, and then 5 seconds after that, the water was taken. The water then is used to treat the wooden frames, creating it's only one shot here, so you can't really see it, but there's more information on the website and on Grey Noise. You can see stains in the wood, which is actually the salt stains of the sea itself. So giving a kind of a physicality to that point, or trying to give a physicality to that floating point within the water, that moment, and that has this trauma and this history behind it. So the next slide, you'll see also a project I did. This is actually also exhibited in Grey Noise in 2014 in the solo there. And this was a project, a lot of my work is very research-based, so I'll go in and look at a traumatic story or a historical moment and sort of investigate that and look at how that can be represented and how that can be investigated through film and video sculptural works. This project was in that process. I was looking at a place in Ireland at the base of Mount Leinster, which is a small mountain near where I grew up, where the last Irish wolf was killed in 1786. That came with it, of course, a very large political story of Irish and our relationship to the British at the time, and how the wolves were also seen as the Irish rebels. So there was a whole kind of narrative behind that. And I went to these sites and I photographed, and I made a small film there, 9.5-minute film from the mountain. And I made a sculptural work, and I made these photographic works. And this is looking at that site, this kind of charged location, and looking at it around. So you can see connections back to the Darkness Project, looking at the site itself. And this is looking up from that exact point through my research where I could find where the last Irish wolf was killed. And it's looking up at the stars, and it's using the technology. It's drawing through the technology to try and find information. Again, I couldn't really see anything. So using a digital image this time, I was able to draw out information. And what you ended up is seeing a section of the Milky Way. But the caveat is that you have these lines of the digital membrane, as it were. So you're looking through kind of a veil of technology to see. So there's always some kind of caveat to the conversation. The next is a video work. I thought it would be interesting to show video as that's what we showed at ADA as well. So I work in different ways with video and with film. Sometimes I work with a video installation, which can be quite minimal and not a lot of effects happening, and creating a sense of deceleration for the viewer, where they have to spend a little time and sort of commit a bit of time to that video work. In this case, this is what's called a shy wave generator. So this is a very simple tool to give kind of as it were, visibility to invisible forces. So you're seeing actually poles on 2 kind of strings, and somebody can go and they wave them, and you actually see how a wave works. And this was filmed at a basement in Bangalore in a planetarium where I did a residency in 2015. And the idea is that you kind of, you first of all are in the space with this object and with this idea of science and how we need to sort of present ourselves, these mechanics, to see the invisible forces, to see that what's behind everything that happens in our life. And then it's looped, so you're kind of caught in this quiet moment where you see it again and again and again. So it's a seamless loop, so you don't know when it starts and when it ends actually. And the next work it's quite exciting to be asked to present it, because it's from 2007. And it was, when it initially finished, it was shown a lot, and then kind of, as always happens with an artist, it kind of goes into the background. It was a work I did just when I'd moved to Berlin, actually. And there's an old cinema, one of the oldest cinemas in Berlin, called the Tilsiter Lichtspiele. And I made a short film there about a man who follows these very strange events on his own space. There's nobody else in the cinema. He's in a bar in the front of the cinema, and he's kind of going through these obsessive and slightly strange techniques. And he's looking at a Polaroid, and he's doing also the normal stuff like lighting the candles and preparing candles for the bar. And then he goes in to the back and he presents a Super 8 film, which is his kind of personal obsessive collection or documentation of clouds. So he's sort of obsessed with these somehow capturing the uncapturable, the fleeting, and he presents that and he watches that, and then he has a small moment. I won't say too much because it's obviously live today, so everyone can go and watch it, but he goes and he interacts with his own representations of nature. So that was, yeah, that's all the little snapshot from today, but everything is, there's more stuff online and on the website if anyone's interested.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I was thinking while you were telling us about you know, kind of going back in time really for us, about how certain works that you've made have to me personally seemed strangely prescient. And you know, I had that feeling when looking at a rough cut of the video that you're working on now, where you know, where breathing is a sort of central motif in that work. And while you were showing actually the images of the bat caves at the moment, I was thinking about this sort of you know, and the relationship between man and nature through that work. And so much of what we have been so preoccupied with this past year is precisely that relationship. And of course, you know, this is not deliberate, this is coincidence. But I wondered if you speculate on that coincidence and whether you feel that you know, that kind of articulation of somehow having your finger on the pulse is something that is germane to your practice, or if it's something that you don't really worry too much about.
I mean, as I said, I research a lot, so I'm always having 5 or 6 projects that are always in my studio and in my mind that I'm developing, and sometimes they're cross-pollinating between each other. But of course, as like if you spend, for example, on the film now, it's over 2 years working on that. You're looking at investigating different elements, and you go back and you film again. They start to become influenced by what's happening in the world, and your own personal direction after, let's say, a year, it can be quite different than where you started off. You may still have, for example, in the film, the same footage that you have already shot, but where it's going becomes influenced by what's happening. I mean, with regards to what's happening with Corona, it is, the breathing aspect was always about sustainability, and that's coming from our dependence on the natural world. So for sure, it's a parallel to Corona, what's happening. So I was looking at coral and how that is affected and how we're dependent on that. But yeah, so it's very kind of, yeah, it's very influenced, of course, by what's happening. So I think, yeah, the work becomes changed over time. And then in this case, some of the more recent projects, they are being influenced by Corona and by isolation and by our own dependency on our physical bodies. So that's where sort of new works are. I sort of see that looking at them, and maybe I won't really know until they're finished, but I see the effects of this last months on the new projects. So yeah, it is, for me, it's always changing until the point where it has to sort of be finished, where it goes into for the film and it goes into the edit or whatever. Yeah.
Well, it was really uncanny for me to come across The Collector of Skies, because it's so perfectly described for me what we are going through now, even though it's a work from 2007. So thank you again for letting us include that.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure.
I'm going to move on now to Sarah Al-Meheri. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for waiting patiently, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about your practice.
First of all, thank you, Nada, and the Abu Dhabi Art team and the patron circle that are here today. Very honored to be a part of this among amazing artists. And so yeah, I'm an artist, a Malay artist based in Abu Dhabi, and I explore themes of materiality, form, language, and memory between the realm of narrative and abstract and image and poetry. And I'll be taking you through a lot of my graduation show that was then shown at Carbon 12 last fall. So this work here is a painting called Blueberry, in which I investigate memories that I may or may not have had from Tennessee, in which where my grandmother is from. And the title suggests what the object is as I paint it on such a micro level. It's a window into a heritage, learning and unlearning that as well. And on the next slide, you can see an installation shot from the show itself with the other paintings that were there. I have also painted a firefly, a tractor tire, denim, and a water tower, in which I investigate these objects that are very faint in my memory, are so vivid in color, and that's where the droppings of the color of the line from the painting come down. And then in the next slide is another series of works called Building Blocks, in which I collect wood scraps and I put them together and play with them until they seem resolved. And this is an ongoing series, actually. This one particularly is from the second series of this body of work, in which I also look at the natural pigments from the wood and try to recreate that with acrylic paint. And a lot of my work as well is has a very particular palette. It's quite muted as well. So I like to have this neon line that goes through the work as well to break that sort of palette that you can see in front of you. And this is also an installation shot amongst the first series and second series of the work. And with my practice also investigating this form of language, I install them in such a way where I see it almost as a sentence or a map or a puzzle piece that you're trying to put together. Where does one line start? Where does the other end? And the viewer can make those connections as well. And on the next slide is a piece called Fictionalized Structures, in which instead of using my memories or my grandmother's memories, I look at an archived image of coal miners in Tennessee. And I believe there are 6 pieces in this series, and I had cut up the photo itself and started to work formally and started to create these shapes from the image itself. So I wasn't looking at the memory perhaps, but coming at it in such a way where I was interested in form and interested in shapes, and how can a memory or a photograph go beyond itself as well. And then in the next slide is the work for Abu Dhabi Art this year. This was actually part of the body of work, but I had not shown it. And it's called In Conversation. It's graphite and acrylic on wood, and I'd used language from Agnes Martin, which I was very inspired by for the show. And I was reading a lot of her diary entries, and she talks a lot about the subconscious and making and how you also make subconsciously. I was really interested in that idea. And so I intuitively started to pick out words and sentences from her diaries and hand wrote them until I felt it was resolved or enough was said. And then in response to that, I was looking at my own poetry from, I also often work, I create work and also write simultaneously. So I was looking back at those notes in my studio and also intuitively picking out those sentences and writing in response to that. And then there's a sentence in between that says, "This must be resolved." And I think that's really funny, because I don't think the work or the conversation is at a resolved state. It's constantly in conversation, as the title suggests. And then in the next slide, going back to the Building Blocks and Wood series, it's a body of work that I'm constantly creating and expanding. And so this one in particular was shown earlier this year online on the Untitled Art Fair alongside Austrian painter Bernhard Blumen, and we were speaking about color and form. And for this series in particular, I was also incorporating found furniture pieces, as I often find just wooden scraps that are recycled. I wanted to include unique pieces that I find on my walks and on my treasure hunts. And the next, yes. This is my most recent body of work. It was created as part of the Sheikha Salama bint Habdan Emerging Artist Fellowship in collaboration with the Rhode Island School of Design. And it's currently shown at Warehouse 421. So if you're in the city, make sure to check it out in person. And it's an installation of 40 plaster casts of a styrofoam box. And the mold started to break on me when actually creating it. And so I took that further and started to incorporate change and repetition and exhaustion in the work. Every single time I would cast the piece, I would remove something from it or add something back into it that was native from the box itself. And I then set rules for myself for the installation to find lines. I think you can also make that connection between the building blocks in this work as well, where I'm very interested in lines and layers as to organize collected information. And so I started to put them together, and they're containers, yet they contain themselves as well. And on the next slide, you can see that I've added blue tape to mark the negative spaces on a two-dimensional level on the floor, as well as the casts themselves are positive impressions of negative space. And so just further investigating what negative space means, what is a container, and is there an end or a beginning to a work? And the main question is, what is an original, and is everything an original, as it's always stemming from somewhere else, repositioning, replacing, and reformatting. And then in the last slide is also shown as part of Abu Dhabi Art, in which I began this community initiative project called Artist Talks, in which I reach out to artists that are based in or affiliated with the UAE and have a conversation in a very informal setting, but amongst people in the community, where people can ask questions and engage in a conversation in a learning and supportive environment. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And congratulations on the show at SIF. I really cannot wait to see it. And before we open up to the floor, I just wanted to ask you a question about Artist Talks. If you could just tell us about where the idea came from and how this sort of evolved, and maybe tell us a little bit about the series.
So it was in response to the COVID situation that happened when we had lockdown around February or March, I believe. And the series started in April. And it was a conversation amongst friends that felt that the community, we needed to know more about the people that are in the community, their practices, where is a platform beyond institution that can then house these talks or just house these conversations. So I took the initiative to start one, and one became 2, 3. And there are people that I know and people that I may not know that well. So it was also a great way for me to have these conversations and have a more tight-knit community. And it was just really in response to having a space to speak about work. Sometimes artists themselves even wanted critique sessions, and that's also something the platform allows. And you can also find these on YouTube, so they act as an archive as well for those that want to come back, because they are live, but where you can ask live questions, but you can also access them at a different time.
And I would encourage everybody who's listening today to access this kind of amazing archive of contemporary practice. I think it's gone beyond just the UAE, really of the region. I think we can open up to questions for all of the artists at this stage. I can see one here, which is addressed to Augustine, which is from Mervi. Augustine, after the devastating effects of Typhoon Ulysses, volcanic eruptions, the COVID pandemic, etc., do you think, which of your works do you think best describes or showcases the resilience of the Filipino community?
Hi, thank you so much, Marivi, for that question. The resilience of Filipino people has always been there. It's always been part of my work, but also if I were to point out in a specific photo, it's the how to slouch when sleeping photo. And my work in Art Dubai, which was cooking adobo in the heart and heat of Dubai, is one of that kind of work. That work specifically points out to the resilience of a Filipino body living and working in a migrant place. And I do also have a problem with the resiliency of Filipino people because there is so many wrong things that our government is doing to us. And we don't have a choice just to be, except for us to be resilient and kind of deal with all the struggles that we're going through in our own ways. And if I were to speak about resiliency in my work, it will always be at the heart of my practice, whether or not it's dealing with the materials I use for my photography, it's going to be the way I write my words and how limited I am with materials and with words and with photographs and trying to make it work. That's sort of I hope that answers the question. I do hope that speaks in behalf of my resiliency, and yeah.
Thanks, Augustine. Do we have any more questions or comments from the audience? Or do you guys have any questions or comments for each other? I have one which I think any of you could answer. And it was really interesting actually to hear you present one after the other. I was struck really by the interest in photographic process and taking the photograph, which we know of as a very kind of representational technology, and pushing it into abstraction. And then also just abstraction. And I realized that all four of you are at some ways formally really interested in the language of abstraction. And I wondered if you could, perhaps address that that kind of urge in terms of, pushing away from the representational to a more open-ended form.
I mean, I think you can say a lot more with abstraction. I think it doesn't have to be so dictated with what you say, and that question about subjectivity and objectivity is very interesting that someone asked, but I think abstraction can change the way you think, can change or shape the way you perceive, because you're kind of looking at something in a less defined way, and you yourself as a viewer will be able to enter into that space of questioning your relationship between something, rather than if it wasn't, abstract. I think it's much more dictated.
Sarah, I see you've unmuted yourself. Were you going to add something?
Sure, I can add something. I think abstraction is really interesting as well in terms of a narrative. Sarah also said that it's not clear. I also see abstraction as a language, and I use that quite often in my work. I believe that you shouldn't give everything to the viewer, and there should be that space in between where this investigation between the viewer and the artist is kind of lingering. And I think that's really beautiful. That's what abstraction means to me.
Anna Kutsi has asked, is abstraction veiling our memories? And I'm going to ask MJ to answer that as the last question, because I can see Barbara waiting to make her final comments.
Okay. I just initially just wanted to say that for me, how abstraction works is also allowing for accessibility. So particularly with me, when I'm talking about a topic that's quite difficult, you know, you can really just represent that, or you can actually create a space where there is accessibility for that, where someone can kind of enter into the world that you've presented, and then behind that is this other narrative, this other sort of discussion. In my case, it was like with the light pollution that can come then from behind. Veiling our memories, yeah, maybe. I think it can also be opening memories. You can do the opposite actually. So it can kind of create a space where people have to sort of go in with their with what they bring to the work, and then it ends up sort of triggering other memories or triggering associations that they have to the things that are presented or the ideas that are presented.
It's a great answer. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Oh, Augustine, go ahead.
No, I wanted to add on to MJ's thing. For me, abstraction is it creates a space for intimacy for the viewers and the readers as well, because that kind of time wherein they decipher what's happening with the visual that they see kind of creates this short-term relationship and forms a short-term history to the viewer and to the artist as well. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, I hope all of you will form that relationship with these artists' works by visiting the exhibition, A Picture Held Us Captive, over the course of the next few days. And thank you so much, Barbara, for this opportunity. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Augustine, Sarah, Michael John, Sarah, and Nada, for this fantastic insight into your art and for sharing with us your knowledge and your passion. As I said earlier, the virtual Abu Dhabi Art started the 19th of November and will continue till the 26th. For this first time ever, 6 guest curators will work with galleries and artists to present work online, each with a different geographic focus. Abu Dhabi Art has prepared a great program for you, so please don't hesitate to go on their website, abudhabiart.ae, where you will find all the information about the fair and its program. Do not also hesitate to follow our website and Instagram, theartcircle.ae, where you will find replays of our webinar, but also all information about the Art Circle. On behalf of the Art Circle board, I would like to thank you all for coming today and for joining us. Stay safe, stay tuned, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.